The wind scraped across the high ridge like sandpaper dragged across metal, each blast sharp enough to sting exposed skin. It carried the kind of cold that didn't just sit on the surface, it burrowed straight through fabric, skin, and bone until it settled in the marrow. Most people would have curled up, shivered, cursed, or begged for rotation hours ago, but Ellie Kane didn't move. Her body lay deep inside a hide she had carved out with her own hands before sunrise, a narrow trench scooped from frozen earth and built up with jagged stones, dead brush, and a thin crust of snow to keep the shape natural. The ghillie suit wrapped around her was layered with winter, dipped netting that blended seamlessly with the rocks. From even a few feet away, she looked like the mountain itself, motionless, colorless, part of the landscape. Her breathing was slow, controlled, almost non-existent. Not even a fog of warmth betrayed her presence. The only hint of life in that frozen stillness was her eyes, sharp, clear, unblinking, locked on the valley below. 12 hours on the ridge, 5 hours without shifting more than a half-inch, 27 minutes since the last god rotation. Ellie counted everything, patterns, footsteps, shadows, timing. It was how she stayed alive. The command net crackled softly in her earpiece, a burst of static pushing through the quiet. Then came the voices, careless, light, unfiltered. "She's still up there. Bet the female contractor's frozen stiff by now." One operator joked, laughing at his own remark. Another jumped in. "Man, she only got that Overwatch slot 'cause no one else wanted to freeze their ass off on a mountain for half a day. Lucky her, babysitting a quiet valley." Their laughter echoed faintly through the radio, carried by the cold air. Ellie blinked once. She didn't answer. She rarely did. Mockery didn't sting anymore. Years of field work, crawling through swamps, deserts, cliffs, and war zones had hardened her skin thicker than armor. People always underestimated her. Contractors, soldiers, even commanders at times. They'd see a woman with quiet eyes and a small frame and assume softness, assume fragility, assume she was someone who needed shelter, not someone who provided it. Fine, let them talk, let them laugh. None of it mattered as long as she could see everything they couldn't. Her gaze slid back to the compound tucked inside the valley. From a distance, it looked the same as it had for days. 2 trucks parked in their usual places near the gate. 3 men pacing their routine patrol routes. A few more scattered near the main building. But something about the rhythm pulled at her instincts. It was too smooth, too static. A place like this never stayed that predictable. A crow landed near the gate. A guard didn't even flinch. That wasn't normal. Her instincts tightened like a knot pulled against itself. Something was shifting under the surface, small details stacking into a quiet warning she couldn't yet explain. Ellie adjusted one gloved finger along the rifle stock, the movement barely a whisper. Her body stayed molded to the ground, but her senses sharpened, spreading outward like invisible feelers. Every sound mattered. Every stillness mattered more. The valley's usual noises, idle chatter, footsteps, engines starting, doors slamming, were muted today. Too muted, the kind of quiet that didn't happen naturally, the kind of quiet that preceded something planned. Her breath remained calm, controlled, invisible, but her pulse had slowed to a sniper's rhythm, each beat steady as a metronome. The men on the radio kept laughing, joking, filling the airwaves with dismissive noise. They still didn't know she could hear every word, still didn't know their underestimation only sharpened her focus. She didn't blame them. They hadn't seen what she'd seen. They didn't know the layers of silence that came before an ambush. They didn't know how rhythm could betray danger long before a weapon did. But Ellie knew. And whatever was happening down there in that valley wasn't routine. Not today. She exhaled slowly, barely a trace of warmth leaving her lips. Something's coming, she thought, and she was the only one who could see it. The compound seemed to breathe differently now, as if the entire valley were inhaling and refusing to let the air go. Ellie stayed perfectly fused to the mountainside, but her senses stretched farther, pulling in every detail the cold wind carried. She shifted her gloved finger a hair's width along the rifle stock, not enough for anyone to notice, not enough to disturb the camouflage she'd worked nearly an hour to build. Just enough to settle her grip into the pocket formed from countless missions, countless Overwatch nights, countless lives depending on her staying invisible. Her body temperature had dropped, slowed by the icy environment, but her focus burned with the same heat as a rifle chamber after a volley. Every instinct she possessed, the ones honed through years of operations, failures, recoveries, and near deaths, began tightening like steel wire. Below, the men in the compound continued their movements. One guard paused at a corner, staring off into the distance for a second too long. Another adjusted his radio but didn't speak. A third kept glancing toward a shack near the back gate, as if waiting for something. None of them made mistakes. None of them looked bored. This wasn't routine. Ellie exhaled softly through her nose, a breath so controlled, so shallow, it barely counted as breathing. The frost on her mask didn't even stir. The radio crackled again. "Yo, Kane," one operator called casually, not expecting a response. "You alive up there, Snow Queen?" Another chuckled. "Bet she's frozen to the damn rifle." Ellie ignored them. But she did lift her hand just enough to tap her PTT button, not to speak, but to tighten the wire against her cheek. It grounded her, a familiar gesture, a ritual almost. Her eyes remained glued to the ridge below. The radio chatter behind her meant nothing. The valley meant everything. Something was wrong. Her instincts weren't guesses. They were warnings built from muscle memory and scars. She narrowed her eyes. A truck door near the main building opened slow, deliberate. A man stepped out wearing a coat too heavy for the mild activity. His posture was straight, rigid, too rigid for a guard, too rigid for anyone pretending not to be noticed. He lifted a radio and spoke quickly. That was new. Ellie blinked once. Her scope zoomed half a notch tighter, allowing her to read the man's expression, focused, alert, expectant, expecting what or who. The wind shifted slightly, brushing the back of her neck like a cold warning from the mountain itself. Ellie lowered her head a fraction, letting the ghillie suit settle more naturally around her. Her heartbeat slowed again, a deliberate choice. The calmer the pulse, the steadier the shot. The steadier the shot, the clearer the judgment. She watched every small movement. A guard paused to tie his boot, but his fingers weren't on the laces. They were on something tucked beneath the cuff. Another man scraped his boot in the dirt, but the pattern he drew was too clean, too geometric, almost like a directional signal. Ellie watched, felt, measured. None of this was random. She pressed her cheek slightly into the rifle stock. The familiar cold metal met her skin like a handshake between old partners. The mountain wind grew harsher, scattering flakes of snow across her scope. She blinked them away. Then, more movement, quick, subtle at the rear of the compound. A shadow inside the shack she'd been monitoring shifted. The silhouette was larger than the others, slower, deliberate. It wasn't someone pacing or checking equipment. It was someone waiting. Her instincts tightened even more. She knew that rhythm. She knew that buildup. She'd lived through too many ambushes, too many quiet mornings that erupted into chaos, and this valley was moments away from crossing that same line. Her eyes flicked right another man, walking too slow, glancing up the ridge with just a little too much interest. Could they see her? No, impossible. She was buried, invisible, but they knew someone was watching. And someone inside the shack knew more than the rest. The operators in her comms were still laughing, still careless, still unaware of the shift happening beneath her crosshairs. Ellie's lips parted slightly as she took in the coldest breath of the day. Not fear, not stress, focus, pure, deadly, trained focus. She zeroed her scope on the shack door. Something inside was about to move. Down in the valley, the wind died, too sudden, too silent. Ellie's pulse dropped to a sniper's heartbeat. Something's about to break open, she thought, and she was the only one ready for it. The valley fell into an unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that didn't drift in slowly, but dropped all at once, heavy and absolute. Ellie felt it before she heard it, or rather, before she didn't hear anything at all. The wind that had scraped across the ridge all day suddenly vanished. The flapping tarps in the compound stopped. The casual footsteps halted. Even the distant croak of the lone mountain crow disappeared as if nature itself was holding its breath. Ellie tightened her grip on her rifle. Moments like this weren't coincidence. They were precursors, the quiet heartbeat before an explosion. Her scope stayed locked on the shack near the rear gate, its shadowed interior barely visible through the cracked wooden frame. She had been studying its rhythm for the past hour, watching the movements. Small, deliberate, patient. Something or someone inside was waiting for a signal, and judging by the sudden stillness, the signal was coming. One guard near the main building stopped mid-step. His hand floated toward his weapon, but not to rest, to prepare. Subtle, practiced, unhurried. Another adjusted his coat, shielding something at his waist. A third looked up toward the hillside again, eyes lingering a bit too long, as though he sensed a presence he couldn't confirm. Ellie remained stone, snow, earth. Her breath barely fogged her mask. Her heartbeat was slow, metronomic, sniper. Steady, but the pressure in her chest tightened, not fear, not even anxiety, just the weight of knowing, understanding the exact moment the world shifts from routine to danger. The radio operators behind her, still laughing, still making casual jokes, still unaware of the storm forming beneath her crosshairs, Ellie resisted the urge to warn them not yet. A premature call could blow the Overwatch advantage. And right now, Overwatch was all she had, all they had. She watched, waited, measured. Then, movement subtle but undeniable, the shack door eased open a few inches, enough for a figure's shoulder and half a face to appear. The man wore no guard uniform. His clothing was thicker, cleaner, a leader, a coordinator, possibly a handler. He scanned the compound, checking each guard with a look that said more than words. A silent roll call. A confirmation, then his hand lifted, 2 fingers raised, a signal. Ellie's eyes narrowed. Every guard who had been pretending to wander snapped into formation. Quick movements, precise angles. One moved toward the gate. 2 closed in toward the main building, another crouched behind a vehicle, everything synchronized, everything sharpened, everything turned purposeful. It wasn't an ambush forming, it was a mobilization. Something or someone was expected to arrive. Ellie's lungs expanded with the coldest, slowest inhale yet. She had seconds before whatever was coming reached the valley. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not pressing, just preparing. The rifle felt heavier now, as though it too sensed the tension tightening in the air. "Command, this is Kane," she whispered finally. A crack of static cut her off. Then a voice, light-hearted, oblivious, answered, "Snow Queen speaks. What's up there, Kane? See a ghost?" Ellie's gaze stayed locked on the shack. Quiet, she murmured, too quiet. "Ooh, spooky." One operator joked. She ignored him. Area just shifted. Guard routes changed. They're mobilizing. Something's happening. A pause on the line. The first moment of seriousness all day. How sure, certain. Ellie said. On the ridge, the wind picked up again, but now it carried a sound. A low, distant hum rolling through the valley like thunder, muffled by snow. Engines, multiple, approaching from beyond the mountain pass. Ellie's pulse slowed deeper, her senses sharpened so intensely that the world narrowed into a tunnel of cold clarity. The guards began moving faster, now purpose in their steps, urgency in their gestures. The shack door swung wider, revealing more figures inside. This wasn't a routine event. This wasn't a supply drop. This was coordinated, the kind of movement Ellie had seen only before high-level meetings, or militant transfers, or exchanges intended to be unseen by the world. The hum grew louder, vehicles, large ones, coming fast. Ellie lowered her cheek deeper into the rifle stock, aligning her eye perfectly behind the scope. Her crosshairs hovered over the shack doorway. Wind steadied, breath vanished, heartbeat flattened. The first vehicle crested the far ridge, a black SUV, armored, moving with precision, not local, not random. Ellie's lips parted as she whispered into comms, eyes open, contact inbound. No one was laughing now. She tightened her trigger finger by 1 silent millimeter. This valley is about to explode, and Ellie Kane was the only line between surprise and survival.